everybody shifts around when that happens. Don, where did he go? Oh, there he is.
Well, and I don't know Don Newland, I don't think.
Okay, so Don Newland was before your time, Karen. Don is formerly a missionary to Vietnam.
Oh, yes, I saw that in your email. Okay, good.
Yes, he speaks pretty good Vietnamese. Anyways, during the course of his missionary work, he became an atheist. And, of course, you might imagine that created all kinds of difficulties, especially because he's married to a Christian woman. So have you ever heard of the Clergy Project, any of you? This was a program that was started to assist clergy who become atheists and try to provide some counseling and, they're just completely alone. Think of how alone they are compared to your average atheist who is surrounded by believers and trying to find their way. So Don has had some recent changes in his life, which he's going to explain to us. His friend Craig Williams there, I guess they are kind of going to collaborate to write a book about Don's experiences, which he's related some of that to us in past church services, but there's a whole lot more where that came from. So that is sufficient introduction, Don.
Oh dear.
You're
You
muted.
okay?
You're muted, Don.
Yeah, Craig is muted too.
Right. There you are.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I wanted to remain muted until it became necessary to unmute. But good morning, Don.
Was there anything else I needed to introduce you? Because there's probably more backstory that I think. Don, did you know of Don Llewellyn? Did you know of Don Newland's situation at all? Okay, he's shaking his head no.
No, I didn't.
Yeah. So I think, Hassan shared with us last time about leaving Islam, how his whole family, hated him and so forth. And I think Don Newland's situation was basically the same. He was connected with a whole community of people who he felt very estranged from when he became an atheist. And, he didn't want to tip his hand before he had kind of an exit plan. So these are some really interesting insights, I think, for just run-of-the-mill freethinkers like the rest of us.
Yeah, this is
you want to
great.
get away then, Don?
Yeah, I'm ready to go if you guys are ready.
Go right ahead, please.
Well, it's great to be here. Haven't been on this broadcast in a while. That's because my wife has been here, and she is now gone. And I'll tell you more about that here in a moment. As Tim said, I've been on here before, and I've shared my story somewhat in part. And the scriptures talk about know in part, and one day we'll see everything for it actually is. And this is the time you're going to see, about me in part. Some of you do, but this is where it's going to you're going to figure out the mess or the whatever my life is, and or the soap opera. That's the way I like to refer to it. I grew up in a small town in Texas, a town called Santa Fe, Texas, and it's about 45 minutes south of Houston. I grew up in a dysfunctional home. That's nothing abnormal, especially in America. And but I was, as a child, I was sexually abused by my mother. She would physically abuse me. She would, if I told my dad something she did, she would lay on top of me until I passed out. And I didn't even remember this until my sisters told me 20 years later. My male cousin sexually abused me. He was homosexual. He passed away a few years ago. He was shot by his, he was cheating on his lover and was shot by his lover, but that's neither here nor there. And my sister also sexually abused me the majority of my formative years. I had no one. I didn't have anybody except for my grandfather that I rarely ever saw. And I turned to food to cope with all the things that were in my life. I hated women for what they had done to me, but I wanted to have a relationship with them. And I gained weight, and I weighed around 350 pounds. I graduated high school just barely, by the skin of my teeth. I think I was second to last. And it's not that I'm not intelligent, just that I didn't apply myself, and there was no one there to help me apply. I was working at that pizza restaurant and contemplating committing suicide. I was finding the best way to do it. Even had a date that I was going to go do it. Went and saw my grandfather for the last time, and I worked at that restaurant with a man named Mac, and he had just come to know Jesus Christ as Savior. He was dating a girl, and she wouldn't marry him unless he was a Christian, and so he went through a Bible study with a local pastor, and he made a profession of faith in Christ. And so he would come to work every day and share the gospel and share the gospel and share the gospel. And I was a disaster. I was a train wreck. I had a skull full of mush. I didn't know anything. And I reached out to Christianity in that time in my life. And I have to say, looking back on it, Christianity probably saved my life. But even though religion is extremely powerful, Louis Farrakhan goes in the inner cities and turns drug addicts to people who follow the Nation of Islam. The Mormons do the very same thing. And even though it can help a person change, it can reach down and find that person where they are and lift them up out of that. It doesn't mean it's true. So immediately I became, I was baptized, taken through a big Bible study for more indoctrination and more indoctrination. As I'm going to the church for the first time in my life, I kind of had a semblance of a family, and that's also a big draw of religions and churches and all of that. And I surrendered to preach during that time, which Baptists believe that God let you know telepathically that He wants you to preach His word, and so I did that. Next thing I know, I'm off at seminary, and learning more and more. I stuffed 5 years of school into 4 into 5. Sorry, the other way around. I didn't graduate because my grandfather had cancer, and I was planning on going back, and I became the youth minister of a little church in Kuntz, Texas, where, of course, I was out of as a missionary. And while I was there as a youth minister, I felt God. A missionary came through going to Vietnam. My father was in the Vietnam War, and I felt that God was calling me to be a missionary to Vietnam. At the time, I weighed 350. I needed, confidence. And so in a year's time, I went from 350 to 208, if you can believe that. And basically all I did was walk 16 miles a day and ate nothing but chicken and broccoli. And so you're going to lose a lot of weight when you do that. And so I hit the road on deputation, preaching at churches around the country. And the goal of deputation is that you gain enough money by going to different churches around the country. And when you get enough to live on overseas, then you go. And then those churches send X amount of dollars to your home church, whether it be 50 or 25 or 200, depending on what the church votes to send you. And so it started out really slow because I was single, and being single doesn't show stability. And so in that process, being on deputation, I met my wife, Penny. I proposed to her on the 3rd date, and we were married 6 months later. We were in Vietnam less than a year after that. When we first got to Vietnam, we were working with another couple out of a church in Oklahoma, and they had a little work going, and we kind of added to it. I think we probably had 15 or 20 people coming. And for a communist country as Vietnam would not openly allow missionaries there. So you would have to have a reason for being there, whether it's going to the university or business or something along those lines. And then underground, we would preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. And how we would do that is we would teach English free of charge. And through that process, we built friendships, and then we'd finally tell them why we were there. And of course, it was up to them to either believe or not believe. And then we would baptize them and make them part of the work while we were there. But the one thing that I said, we would give them the opportunity to believe or not believe. I cannot begin to tell you the influence that Americans have in foreign countries. We're rich, we're powerful, and they are more apt to believe us, your average person, because everyone looks up to America, except for governments. The Vietnamese government didn't care too much for our government, but the people looked up to us. And so they were more apt to believe us. And they were in a particular time in the country where 75% of the population was under the age of 35 because of the Vietnam War. They lost millions of people during that. And, 35 years later, or however long it was, you had a very young population who were always told that these things are true. And then they began to question that. And that's when my wife and I stepped in, preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. When we were there, we had never experienced anything like that before. My wife, would cry every day. She never saw anyone shoot up heroin, but right next door to our house would be people shooting up heroin on the streets. And with my abuses in my life, I did not believe anybody could truly love me. And I didn't even believe my wife loved me at the time. And so my wife was there and she was struggling and I was struggling. It's not easy living in a third world country when you've never even left America before that. And I began to understand that my wife was there because she loved Jesus and because she loved me. And so I began for the first time to believe it was actually possible for someone to love me. And then as I got to thinking about it more, I told myself, do I really believe that Jesus loves me? I didn't believe anybody loved me. I can understand the concept of Jesus coming and dying upon the cross for my sins. I can understand all of those things, but did I really believe that Jesus loved me before I began to understand what love was? And I said no. And so I went to a missionary who was there, told him my story, and he led me to Christ for the second time. I came back home. I was baptized, became a member of my home church, sold cars at Saturn in Beaumont, Texas. Didn't know where my life would be or what I'd be doing. But in that year's time, I was still studying Vietnamese, and I was still, I still love the Vietnamese people. And a revival meeting happened, and we surrendered to go back to Vietnam. And we were, it took us 9 months to get our support, which was unheard of at the time. And next thing I know, we're over in Vietnam. And from 2003 to 2006, we built a work there of about 25 people. And of course, when they would believe, we would baptize them in our bathtub, and then we would build the work. My wife and I tried to have children, and most missionaries in my denomination have anywhere between 5 and 15 children. We would go to different churches and they say, you're the only ones we know that don't have children. Duh, that's real good. And so they would, so we're trying and trying and trying. In 2005, my grandfather died, and we came home for his funeral, and he gave us a little bit of money. And so we started going to fertility doctors. Comes to find out that the reason why we couldn't have kids was me. 50% of my guys were dead, my soldiers. 25% were alive, but swimming in a circle, swimming around. And then the other 25% were alive, but extremely slow swimmers. And so my wife and I mean, the only person in my life outside of my grandfather that truly loved me, she so desperately wanted to be a mother, and I couldn't give that to her. And I felt less of a man than you can even imagine. We went back depressed. It's hard to live in a third world country when you're in a good part in your life, but when you're in depression, it's even harder. And I would go up on the roof and pray for God to just let one of my guys swim a little bit faster. Hannah in the Bible, she prayed and God gave her a child. Abraham and Sarah, every circumstance, there's only a couple, but every circumstance where someone wanted a child, God answered that. And I wanted God to miraculously answer my prayer, but it never happened. It was during the same time where I began to doubt the doctrine of hell. We were, like I said, we were building the work, and this young woman named Anna, I led her to Christ. Her Vietnamese name was Thuy, but Anna was her English name. And she would, this was the most dedicated girl I ever saw in my life. She would ride her bicycle 4 miles to church and 4 miles back home after church. I mean, people in America won't go if the air conditioning's broke. This young woman, and I mean, it'd be pouring down rain, and the doorbell would ring, and there she'd be soaking wet with a smile on her face, ready to come worship the God that I told her about. Finally, one day, the doorbell rang. I opened it up, and it was Anna, and she was crying. She didn't have the normal smile that she normally had, and so I brought her in and asked her what was wrong. In the book of Acts, the Apostle Paul wanted to go to Asia to preach the gospel, but the Holy Spirit forbade them to go. And she read that and she couldn't believe it. And she came and I said this before the last time we were here, but this is a critical, it's a major point. And when and she said, if God would allow the Apostle Paul to come, then maybe my great-grandfather would have heard the gospel and not be in hell today. That hit me extremely hard. And I'm still emotional over that. So what people like me did, I was indoctrinated. They trained me, they educated me to go halfway around the world and indoctrinate them the way I was indoctrinated. But what it does is, in their religion, and of course we don't believe it's true, but it's their religion, it's their culture. They believe that when their loved ones die, they go to some sort of heaven. You've been to a Chinese food restaurant, you walk in and you see an altar there in the front with fruit on it. That's basically what that is. And other things too, spiritism and things. The Vietnamese people were Buddhists and animists. And it was all a mixture in between. And there's a certain population in the South of Catholics that are only there because of the French, who were there for 88 years, who were there to make them slaves and turn them into Catholics. So if there's a Catholic in Vietnam, those are basically the reasons why. But what we did was, by telling them this gospel, we took their loved ones from being in an exalted position to now being in hell. And that's unexcusable. And so I began to question the doctrine of hell. And I sought out to prove my faith to be true. But for the first time in my life, instead of saying the Bible is true, I said, is the Bible true? And so that's a huge distinction, because your average Christian won't allow themselves to say, is the Bible true? They say the Bible is true because they don't even want to contemplate the fact that it may not be. So I began to read books by atheists who are now Christians, and Christians who are now atheists, and theology books and the God delusion. And I'm so glad that for the invention of these things, because it'd been hard to be reading the God delusion with my wife sitting across the room, but I can do this and she doesn't know what I'm reading. And back then she wouldn't even know what I was reading. And I began to read things in the Bible that I didn't know were there. I read them. I had to read them, such as slavery and, misogyny, and just the whole gamut of things that are, just written by primitive man goat herders from the Bronze Age. And so finally one day I got out of bed and I said, I do not believe in this crap anymore. But I looked over in the bed and there was my wife sitting there, and I knew that she was still a believer. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know where I was going to go. My whole education, everything prepared me to be a minister. I was halfway around the world, and even though I felt a great relief that I no longer believed, I was scared to death of what was going to happen. Was my wife going to leave me? What was going to happen to me? I went on the internet and I was looking for something, and I came across Freethought Radio, which is a radio program by the Freedom from Religion Foundation out of Madison, Wisconsin. And he had a man on there by the name of Chris, and that was his pseudonym. Chris was an acting Southern Baptist pastor who was an atheist. And as I sat there and listened to that, I bawled crying that somebody out there knew what I was going through. somebody out there. I mean, I wasn't the only one. I thought I was the only one. I called Dan Barker and his wife, Andy Laurie Gaylor, and I was my wife was taking a shower, and and I talked to Dan this last week, and he remembered this, laughing. And I said, if she comes out, I've got to hang up. And then all of a sudden I heard my wife coming down, and I hung up on Dan Barker, and he said he remembered that. And he told me about the Clergy Project. The Clergy Project is an organization where it's a website, actually, and unfortunately now it's down as of a couple of days because someone forgot to pay the bill. But that's neither here nor there. And it started out with 52 members of Baptists, Catholics. At the time, it was all the Christian religion basically in America, but now there are imams or former imams and just all Muslims all across the gamut. But it's mostly Christians, and it's mostly fundamentalist Christians, like I was. And anyway, then he told me about that Daniel Dennett and Linda Lascola were writing a book. First they did a case study, and then they're writing a book over ministers who no longer believe. So I called Linda Lascola from Vietnam, and I became Dave the Missionary in the book Caught in the Pulpit, which, by the way, in 2 or 3 weeks is going to be a Broadway play.
Wow.
It's going to be called, I think it's The Unbelievers. And Dan Barker isn't sure if I'm in it or not, but he thinks I might be in some way or another, my character. So we came home, and the goal was to get a job. And then when we got a job, then we would resign from the ministry. When we came back, we found out that I wasn't qualified as a minister to do much with what I had and what my training was outside of sales. And I'm not very good at sales because I hate lying to people who are honest. And you'll get that here in a moment. And so then 2008 hit, and the economy crashed, and all the housing market, and everything. I might be getting things out of order here. I'm kind of not looking at my notes right now. I'm sorry. And so we didn't know what we were going to do. I was angry. I was ticked off at being indoctrinated, at what they did to me, what they sent me halfway around the world to do. They're indoctrinated too, but they indoctrinated me. And so I began to seek revenge. The revenge was financial, and the revenge went even deeper than that. For a little less than 20 years, and I'm going to jump to the gun here, my denomination thought my wife and I were over in Asia preaching the word when we were living here in America. We did that her end game was to take it as far as it would go. She felt guilty because she was a Christian, take it as far as it would go, and then resign and ride off in the sunset. My goal was to jump in the deep end of the pool and do a cannonball. But I've drank for the last 5 or 6 years. And the reason why I have is because I knew if I came out as an atheist to her friends and family and churches, that more than likely she would leave me. But if I didn't, I want my life and my story to seem like it matters, and to help other people in that process. And so that was constantly the choice that am I just going to shut up? And even in my marriage itself, I cannot be who I really am because of her Christianity. For first 5 years or so, it became, I was the one who changed and she didn't. And if the shoe was on the other foot, I would have felt exactly like she did. And so I would tell myself that. But she could read her Bible, she could go to church, but I couldn't listen to a podcast. I couldn't be on this particular podcast. because if she came outside and saw me talking to you guys, it would upset her. And that's why when she came back home, my wife was in Texas. Her mom had cancer and she was taking care of her. When she came back home, I stopped being on this Zoom call. So I love her and I wanted to be with her, but at some time I have to be myself. And so as of 2 weeks ago, this coming Tuesday, I outed myself. My wife and I were having an argument over theology. She is the only one I've ever tried to convert to an atheist, because I knew when I came out, that if she wasn't, that she would probably leave me. I probably didn't do it in the best of ways. I called people up and just came right out and told them. And in my denomination, it is that the ripples are still going. I told them that we've lived in the States all this time, and I would send them letters from the mission field that this person was saved and that person was saved and this person was saved. And someone might say, well, that's horrible. You lied to these people. And this might sound like a rationalization, but I really don't care. I lied to those who lied to me. I deceived those who deceived me. If I would have resigned 20 years ago, every single dollar they gave me would have gone to some missionary going to Mexico, some missionary going to Europe, some missionary going to Canada, some missionary going to Asia, who would have done to them what they did to me and what I did to Anna. Yes, I benefited from it. There's no doubt about that. But every dollar I got was my revenge. You say, well, can they sue you? Can they get you for embezzlement? Say Dan Barker, the president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, was reaching into the Freedom from Religion till and using that to enrich his life. Then that's a classic stealing, embezzlement charge. But this was money that they gave my wife and I directly and put it in an account with our name on it. No contract, nothing saying this goes to Don and Penny and this goes to that. There was nothing there. It was under the assumption that we were in Asia doing the good work. There's nothing legal that they can even charge me with outside of maybe lying. And thank goodness that's not something you can get arrested for. And plus, there's a verse in the Bible that says Christians should not bring Christians to court because the name of Jesus is blasphemed. And also, my wife is still a Christian, and so they would have to bring her in as a co-conspirator. So my wife left. She's in Texas now. I'm not saying she still loves me. I still love her, but I don't want her back if I can't be who I am. And so my life is a mess right now. But I had to do it. I had to jump out in that pool. And when it first happened, I was drunk, hungover, suicidal, wasn't thinking straightly. And I didn't have a vehicle. I bought a new vehicle. I got in it. I didn't know at the time that my life has been threatened 3 times. And I didn't know if they were going to show up and shoot me or whatever. And so I got in that new car and I just drove, and with the plans of maybe ending my life because I don't know what I'm going to do financially. And I drove to Cabot, Arkansas, which is where I met my wife. And I drove by her house, and I mourned the end of our possible end of our marriage. Then I was going to go to Colorado, and because I like Colorado, and just hang out till my money ran out. But as I said, I wasn't thinking clearly, and so Then I thought about the Freedom from Religion Foundation in Wisconsin, and so everything was changing because my mind was not there. And so I drove up there, and Dan Barker was out of town, and I woke up the next day deciding if in an Econo Lodge, if I was going to stay. My plan was to get an apartment, to start my life over with the Freedom from Religion Foundation being there. But then I started thinking, if I rent an apartment, all the deposits and everything, I only had $5,000 to my name. And I said that I still have a house at home. And as long as I pay $1,425 by the end of the month, I have a place to live and still get to keep a lot of the money that I have. And I've recently come across a little bit more money that I've gathered. I'm in the process of writing a book, and I had all this written down, but I'm not probably saying all this eloquently. I'm sorry. It's still so emotional for me. And I have Craig Williams, who is there. There's a good chance he's going to co-write it with me. I've talked to Dan Barker, and he, as soon as I told him the bullet points, he says, "You have a book in you." And he knows publishers. He knows he's offered to write the forward if it's written well enough, because he says there's things that have things to say but aren't written well and don't sell, and there's things that have nothing to say that are written well that sell. And so I'm back in Georgia, still being threatened my life. There's a chance I might be getting a job soon, and so I'm looking around at other jobs. This one was looking really promising, and then all I'm trying to do is just keep my head above water. I'm no longer suicidal. Don't worry about that. It was just the initial, because I knew I was always going to do it, but when it finally happens and your wife leaves and everyone finds out, and it's just overwhelming. I can't even begin to explain to you the emotion that I was going through. Anyway, thank you for listening to me, and like I said, there's a ton more I can tell you, but for the most part, my life, and I'm going to be in a good place, but it's going to take some time, and it's going to, I don't know what it's going to take, but I keep going on. Thank you so much.